There are places in the multiverse that human beings were never meant to find. Worlds populated with swarms of crawling spiders, isolated dimensional prisons where faceless corpses mimic the living, and realms bathed in the purest darkness where a glimmer of light may reveal more than what a visitor might ever want to see. These places serve to remind us that every one of us is, before any other essential quality of our collective experience, alone. Every human mind is an isolated incident, struggling to make sense of every environment, while hoping to find common ground with the other people in our lives. We strive to understand others and be understood, but sadly it is often the case that we must interact with fellow human beings whose motivations seem alien to us. All too frequently, we are surrounded by people we cannot relate to, in situations we have little control over. And even if we make attempts to articulate ourselves, there will always be an insurmountable gulf between the limits of our experience and others. As far as each of us knows, we are the only free-willed individuals in the cosmos, and even the nature of that free will is deeply in question. While many of us become overwhelmed by these bigger questions and are forced to confront our inherent loneliness, there is an instinct to turn to unfeeling things for answers. Surely the vast expanse of creation that made us must have done so for a reason. Most of who ask that question spend their entire lives waiting for confirmation of that reason. They reach out for something or somewhere that they are meant to be. It is only the vanishing rare few that find it, an unmistakable answer in an unspeakable place, a terrifying vista of madness that all but screams, "You will never belong." SCP-507, the reluctant dimension hopper, has found himself in places like these more times than he is able to count. He has seen the spiders, the room of corpses that mimic human activity, and has peered through the darkness assisted by a flashlight, and seen only the smiling face of a humanoid monster. There are dozens more frightening and unsettling universes that SCP-507 has encountered, and all known instances have been archived in document SCP-507-3B. Any one of the innumerable horrors that this otherwise ordinary human male has endured would send a shiver down the spine of the best of us. But unfortunately, this is little comfort to SCP-507. Facing down the madness of the abyss and returning intact starts to become less triumphant when it is a weekly, sometimes daily, occurrence. The Dimension Hopper can barely have a moment of peace in this life, as his irregular shifts into different realities occur without any warning. And all the research that the Foundation has done on SCP-507 seems to indicate that there will never be an end to these trips into the infinite. But no end does not necessarily imply the lack of a beginning. The tragic existence of SCP-507 could not have started without a cause, and part of the Foundation's goal in containing SCP-507 is to discern an explanation for the humanoid's signature unstable mode of interdimensional travel. So far, the experiments have raised one burning question after another, with SCP-507 himself having difficulty recounting some of the stranger aspects of the dimension he hops into, and in a grander sense, what it might all mean. But the Foundation has no choice but to listen intently to SCP-507 and take notes on everything he says in regards to his condition. After all, the phenomenon of leaping to other worlds primarily affect the Dimension Hopper himself, and can really only be understood through a thorough understanding of the subject. Over the course of many interviews with SCP-507, the research team has pieced together what they believe might be the definitive history of the reluctant Dimension Hopper from his native reality to the flux of ever-changing hellscapes that occupies his current days. While it is impossible to verify, due to the imperfect nature of memory and the countless traumas suffered by SCP-507, the Foundation believes that this record can be used as a case study for further investigation into the multiverse itself. On a less practical level, the interviews can help the Foundation to improve containment for SCP-507 and make sure that his existence is as lacking in unnecessary suffering as possible. We're going back to the beginning, to the earliest dimensional hops that SCP-507 can remember in detail. Considering the persistent nature of SCP-507's anomalous capabilities, it was hardly surprising for the Foundation to learn that the humanoid did not have a conventional childhood. 507 has never made any mention of identifiable biological parents, nor of any grade school educational facility, public or private. In the absence of these markers of normalcy, SCP-507 describes spending an indeterminate amount of his formative years in a fantastical realm known as Limonora. Though it has apparently been decades since SCP-507 has hopped into Limonora, he was able to describe the dimension in great detail. A grassy plain overrun with red, honeycombed standing stones that seemed to sing with thousands of beautiful voices as the wind blew through them. The skies of Limonora were colored a velvety bluish purple, which never got any dimmer than a commercial nightlight. There were shallow streams of spring water that seemed to run in all directions regardless of elevation. There were also dangers in Limonora. Flocks of swooping birds, which SCP-507 described as having the appearance of skinless vultures. These vultures would often attempt to capture SCP-507 and bring him to a location known as the Dawnwell. As one might expect, 507 was never actually apprehended by the creatures, but insists that these were more than ordinary birds of prey. Vultures don't hunt for live human children, being scavengers after all. It has also been made clear that 507 was the only human of any sort in Limonora. This has led the researchers to conclude that he most likely wasn't born in that reality, and had previously hopped there from a dimension of origin that remains inaccessible due to his lack of memories during infancy. The Dimension Hopper claims that his best friend, Finneker, always protected him from these avian threats. Finneker was another creature native to Limonora, who resembled an anomalous crustacean the size of a large dog, covered in what SCP-507 believed to be a coat of tufted brown fur. When fending off the vultures, Finneker carried a heavy cudgel in one of his claws. The blunt instrument was said to be carved from the same material as the musical standing stones. Additionally, 507 has remarked that the inside of Finneker's shell was mostly hollow and could be used as a shelter and resting place for the young Dimension Hopper, as long as he had the continued friendship of the creature. Many researchers who have taken statements from SCP-507 regarding Limonora have reflexively come to view the unconfirmed dimension and 507's experiences therein as the product of a wild imagination, made more vivid due to a traumatic upbringing. On the other hand, SCP-507 insists that Limonora is not a psychological coping mechanism and is, in fact, just as real as all of the other dimensions he has hopped into. It is difficult to dismiss his account entirely, as no matter how many times SCP-507 is asked about Limonora and how far apart the interviews are, the details of the account never seem to deviate from what had previously been established. During his time in Limonora, which may have spanned more than a year, 507 has stated that he was the happiest that he had ever been. Whenever he wasn't avoiding the vultures of the Well of Dawn, 507 passed time by listening to the music from the standing stones, surfing the erratic currents of the shallow streams, and learning rudimentary carving techniques with Finneker. In some ways, Limonora was a paradise for a child. There was no homework or chores, and whenever it was safe, he could play outside as much as he wanted. It wasn't until one terrible night that everything about his isolated existence changed for the worst. While falling asleep inside Finneker's shell, SCP-507 experienced a random dimensional shift to a deep and forbidding forest. At first, he thought this new reality was a dream, as it was abnormally dark and misty, nothing like Limonora. Then, he saw them, the so-called mammal men. SCP-507 remembered their chattering teeth, long and orange, like beaver's teeth, as well as the leathery pale skin that covered their misshapen bodies. The mammal men roared and hissed, making unnatural noises as they chewed into the trees. The sound of it all was very distressing for young SCP-507, who began to flee from the strange humanoids into the nearby bushes. He cried out for Finneker, hoping that his friend would arrive and protect him, but it didn't happen. And try as he might, it seemed as though he couldn't wake up from this nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare at all, in fact, but a true dimensional shift from which there could be no easy return. Terrified for reasons beyond his comprehension, the young dimensional hopper continued to cry out for his only friend. There was a sudden crack and a loud whoosh as one of the great trees of the forest came toppling down in his direction. SCP-507 braced himself for the inevitable impact, but it never came. He was in what appeared to be a city now, and it was the middle of the day. Crowds of human beings surrounded him, and the sounds of automobiles and phone calls drowned his mind in the cacophony. It was a total sensory overload compared to Limonora, and being exposed to it after having such a harrowing experience in the forest dimension caused SCP-507 to break down into tears. He continued to weep and call out for Finneker, but his crustacean friend was several worlds away now. When the authorities eventually arrived, given a call about a lost child, SCP-507 was brought to the nearby police station. The officers tried to ask SCP-507 questions, presumably about where his parents were or where his home was, but 507 recalls being unable to understand the language they were speaking, and thus there was no hope of communication. The adults seemed equally frustrated and tried speaking to the child in a number of different languages. Eventually, when no parent or guardian appeared to claim the child, it was determined that SCP-507 would be placed in foster care. From there, SCP-507 was given to a family that soon became his legal guardians. He was homeschooled on many of the basic subjects of science and math, and learned the English language through constant tutoring. While his new parents and siblings were willing to entertain his stories of Limonora and Finneker, they believed it was little more than the fantasy of an imaginary friend. Throughout the rest of his youth, SCP-507 experienced no unusual dimension hopping and began to live a relatively normal and unremarkable life. At a certain point, he even began to believe that Limonora never existed. None of the other children he knew had ever experienced something like it, a fact that they would constantly remind him of in their ruthless teasing. Even so, SCP-507 entered his teen years as a shockingly normal individual, given the circumstances. While the Foundation has never been able to verify the names and identities of his foster family members, mostly because SCP-507 has been reluctant to divulge any related information, his seeming loyalty to keeping the people who raised him anonymous is proof enough that this chapter of his life was not fabricated. According to SCP-507's testimony, the involuntary shifting began to reoccur not long after he had gone through puberty. The sudden disappearances worried his family, and many times they believed that he had attempted to run away from home. This also had an impact on his social and educational development, as maintaining both friendships and good grades in high school were difficult when he could disappear for days and weeks at a time. The vast majority of these dimensional leaps are uneventful beyond the strain they put on SCP-507's efforts at a normal life, but one in particular has left a lasting impact on 507. It was during a Halloween block party in his senior year, when SCP-507 shifted away during an attempt to refill his punch. He blinked in shock to find himself in Limonora once more. But it was not as he had left it. The sky was a deep shade of maroon and cracked like a glass surface. From there, these cracks spilled sand-like rain onto the now desolate plains and dried-up rivers. The standing stones were mostly broken, and there was no wind to conduct them into their song. The teenage 507 wandered around this ruined Limonora in disbelief. The fantastical place he remembered had been real for his entire life, but now it was dead. If that wasn't traumatizing enough, nothing could prepare him for what awaited at the Well of Dawn. Near the strange pit of emanated sunlight was the rotted, sun-bleached shell of a massive crustacean, Finneker. 507 barely had any time to take in the sight of his long-lost friend before he was returned to the roof of the Halloween party. That was the last time he ever saw the world of Limonora, but it was far, far from the most horrific sights that the multiverse would have to offer. Want to own an SCP of your own? Go to scpswag.com for premium anomalous merchandise. Now go check out SCP-507 Reluctant Dimension Hopper. And can SCP-096 chase its victims across the multiverse? For more interdimensional adventures from SCP-507.